If you have these 7 habits, your mind is unusually sharp. Stoic philosophy. There is a certain kind of person who walks into a chaotic room and somehow remains the calmest one in it. They are not louder than everyone else, not more credentialed, not even necessarily more intelligent in the traditional sense. But something about the way they think sets them apart. Their mind moves differently, clearer, steadier, harder to rattle. The ancient Stoics studied this kind of sharpness for centuries, and they discovered that it was never an accident of birth. It was the result of specific, repeatable habits, quietly practiced until they became second nature. Today, you are going to discover 7 of those habits. If you recognize even a few of them in yourself, that is not a coincidence. It is evidence that your mind is already operating on a different level than most. And if you do not recognize them yet, do not worry, because every one of these habits can be built, starting today. Before we continue, if you want more of this kind of wisdom delivered to you regularly, subscribe to this channel right now. It takes a few seconds, costs nothing, and ensures you never miss the ideas that could sharpen the way you think for the rest of your life. Let's begin. Habit 1. They pause before they speak. The first sign of an unusually sharp mind is something almost invisible to the untrained eye: the pause. Where most people respond instantly, filling silence out of discomfort, the sharp mind allows a beat of space between hearing something and replying to it. Epictetus taught that an untrained mind reacts like an animal startled by sudden noise, while a trained mind absorbs, evaluates, and only then responds. That pause is not hesitation or weakness. It is the clearest outward sign of inner control, because it proves that the mind, not the impulse, is in command. This habit shows up everywhere once you start looking for it in a heated argument. The sharp mind does not fire back instantly. It waits, choosing words with intention rather than emotion. In a negotiation, the sharp mind lets silence sit in the room, often forcing the other party to reveal more than they intended simply because the silence felt unbearable to them, not to the person who created it. In moments of sudden bad news, the sharp mind takes a breath before reacting, giving itself a sliver of space in which judgment, not panic, gets to decide what happens next. The pause is trainable. Most people lose this ability slowly, worn down by a world of instant notifications and instant replies, where speed is mistaken for intelligence. To rebuild it, practice waiting 3 full seconds before responding to anything that triggers an emotional charge: a comment, a criticism, an unexpected request. In those 3 seconds, ask yourself what response would serve you best, not what response would feel most satisfying in the moment. Over time, this brief pause becomes instinctive, and people will begin to sense that you are simply harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, and far more difficult to read than everyone reacting around you. Habit 2. They question their own assumptions. A genuinely sharp mind treats its own beliefs the way a skilled craftsman treats a tool: useful, but never sacred, always subject to inspection and refinement. The Stoics practiced relentless self-examination, regularly asking whether their judgments about the world were actually accurate or simply comfortable. Marcus Aurelius filled his private writings with self-interrogation, constantly checking whether his anger, his pride, or his fear were based in reality or simply in the stories his mind had constructed without his permission. Most people defend their assumptions as though they were under personal attack whenever those assumptions are questioned. The sharp mind does the opposite. It actively invites the challenge, because it understands that an unexamined belief is a liability, not an asset. If you believe someone dislikes you, the sharp mind asks for the actual evidence rather than accepting the feeling as proof. If you believe a goal is impossible, the sharp mind asks who decided that, and whether that person was even qualified to decide it. This habit of self-interrogation prevents the slow accumulation of unconscious bias that quietly distorts the judgment of almost everyone who never bothers to check it. You can build this habit with a simple daily exercise. At the end of each day, choose one belief or judgment you held strongly, about a person, a situation, or yourself, and ask honestly whether you actually verified it, or simply assumed it. You will be surprised how often the answer is the latter. This single practice, repeated consistently, slowly rewires the mind to demand evidence before conviction, which is precisely the discipline that separates sharp thinkers from reactive ones. If these habits are resonating with you, take a moment now to subscribe to this channel, because the next few habits go even deeper into the mental architecture that built some of history's clearest thinkers. Habit 3. They separate facts from stories. One of the most powerful distinctions the Stoics ever made was the difference between an event and the story we attach to it. A sharp mind learns to isolate the bare facts of a situation from the emotional narrative layered on top of them. Someone did not call you back. That is a fact. The belief that this means they no longer value you. That is a story, constructed entirely by your own mind, often without any supporting evidence at all. Epictetus taught that disturbance never comes from events themselves but from the judgments we attach to them, and the sharp mind has trained itself to notice the exact moment a fact quietly transforms into an assumption. This separation changes everything about how a person experiences difficulty. A traffic jam is simply a fact. Cars, stationary, time passing. The story that this ruins your entire day, that the universe is conspiring against you, that nothing ever goes right for you. These are all optional additions your mind chose to attach, usually out of habit rather than necessity. The sharp mind catches itself mid-story and asks a simple question. What actually happened, separate from what I am telling myself about it? To practice this, the next time you feel a strong emotional reaction to something, write down 2 columns. In the first, list only the observable facts, stripped of interpretation. In the second, list the story you built on top of those facts. Most people are stunned to see how thin the first column is compared to the second. This exercise, repeated often enough, trains the mind to default to facts rather than narrative, which is one of the clearest markers of unusually sharp, emotionally stable thinking. Habit 4. They protect their attention like a resource. The sharp mind treats attention the way a wealthy person treats capital, as something finite, valuable, and far too easily squandered if left unguarded. Seneca warned that people are careful to protect their property and their money but remarkably careless with their time, allowing anyone who asks to consume it freely. Attention works the same way. Every notification, every distraction, every unnecessary conversation is a withdrawal from a limited daily account, and the sharp mind understands that spending this resource carelessly leaves nothing left for the things that actually matter. This habit looks different in practice than people expect. It is not about working harder or longer. It is about working narrower, committing fully to one task, one conversation, one decision at a time, rather than splitting focus across a dozen shallow streams simultaneously. Multitasking, despite its popularity, is something the sharp mind generally avoids, because it understands that switching attention rapidly between tasks does not multiply productivity, it fragments thought, leaving every task slightly worse than it would have been with full presence. Protecting attention also means becoming selective about input. The sharp mind is careful about what it allows into its mental space, which conversations it engages with, which content it consumes, which arguments it chooses to enter. Not because it is closed-minded, but because it understands that a mind exposed to constant noise eventually loses the clarity required for original thought. To build this habit, try setting aside one block of time daily where your attention belongs to a single task only, with every other input deliberately silent. Over time, this single block expands naturally, and the sharper, calmer thinking it produces becomes difficult to live without. Habit 5. They treat discomfort as information, not a threat. Most people experience discomfort and immediately interpret it as a signal to retreat. The sharp mind interprets discomfort differently, as information worth examining rather than a threat to escape from immediately. The Stoics deliberately practiced voluntary hardship for exactly this reason, exposing themselves to cold, hunger, or simplicity not out of masochism, but to train the mind to stay clear and rational even when the body was uncomfortable. This habit builds a kind of mental durability that calm, easy circumstances simply cannot produce on their own. In daily life, this shows up in small but telling ways. A sharp mind facing a difficult conversation does not immediately avoid it. It asks what the discomfort is pointing toward, and whether avoiding it would cost more in the long run than facing it now. A sharp mind facing physical discomfort, like an intense workout or an early wake-up, does not immediately interpret the resistance as a sign to stop, but as a normal and expected part of growth. This reframing, repeated consistently, builds a kind of psychological elasticity that makes the sharp-minded person far harder to derail than someone who has never learned to sit with discomfort at all. This does not mean seeking out unnecessary suffering for its own sake. It means refusing to let momentary discomfort dictate major decisions. Before avoiding something simply because it feels difficult, ask yourself honestly whether the discomfort is signaling actual danger or simply signaling growth. Most of the time, especially in modern life, it is the latter. Training yourself to recognize this distinction is one of the fastest ways to build the kind of resilience the Stoics considered essential to a sharp, unshakable mind. Habit 6. They seek to understand before they judge. An unusually sharp mind resists the very human urge to judge quickly, instead pausing to genuinely understand before forming a conclusion. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that people who wrong us often do so out of ignorance, not malice, and that understanding this distinction prevented unnecessary anger from clouding clear judgment. This is not about excusing harmful behavior. It is about gathering accurate information before reacting to it, because a judgment formed too early is frequently a judgment formed incorrectly. This habit requires intellectual humility, something increasingly rare in a culture that rewards fast, confident opinions over careful, considered ones. The sharp mind asks questions before forming conclusions. When someone behaves in a way that seems frustrating or confusing, instead of immediately assuming the worst possible motive, it asks what context might explain this behavior that is not yet visible. This single habit prevents an enormous amount of unnecessary conflict, because so many human disputes are built not on actual malice, but on incomplete information mistaken for certainty. This habit also applies to ideas, not just people. A sharp mind encountering an unfamiliar or uncomfortable idea resists the urge to dismiss it instantly, choosing instead to understand its strongest version before deciding whether to accept or reject it. This is far more demanding than reflexive judgment, because it requires sitting with discomfort and uncertainty rather than resolving it immediately with a quick conclusion. But this patience produces a kind of intellectual depth that reflexive judgment never can, which is precisely why people with this habit tend to be the ones others trust most when a situation is genuinely complicated. Habit 7. They review their day with honesty. The final habit shared by unusually sharp minds is the practice of nightly reflection. The Stoics, especially Seneca, ended each day by mentally reviewing their actions, their reactions, and their decisions, asking honestly where they fell short and where they succeeded. This was never about self-punishment. It was about accumulating accurate self-knowledge over time, the same way a good investor reviews their portfolio regularly, not to feel guilty about losses, but to make better decisions going forward. This habit builds sharpness because it closes the loop on learning. Without reflection, the same mistakes repeat indefinitely, because the mind never pauses long enough to notice the pattern. With reflection, even a single day produces useful data, moments of impatience worth addressing, moments of clarity worth repeating, conversations that could have gone better with a different approach. Over months and years, this nightly habit compounds into something remarkable, a mind that learns continuously from its own lived experience, rather than simply repeating the same patterns on autopilot. To build this habit, set aside 5 minutes each night before sleep. Ask yourself 3 honest questions. Where did I act with discipline today? Where did I let emotion drive a decision it should not have driven? What is one thing I will do differently tomorrow because of what I noticed today? This simple, repeatable ritual is perhaps the single most powerful habit on this list, because it ensures that every other habit you are building gets refined continuously, rather than left static and unexamined. Bringing the 7 habits together. An unusually sharp mind is rarely the product of natural talent alone. It is built, deliberately and repeatedly, through habits like the ones you just learned. Pausing before speaking, questioning assumptions, separating fact from story, protecting attention like a finite resource, treating discomfort as information rather than threat, seeking understanding before judgment, reviewing the day with honesty. None of these require extraordinary circumstances or rare opportunities. They require only consistency, practiced quietly, day after day, until they become the default way your mind operates rather than something you have to consciously force. If you recognized yourself in several of these habits, that is a sign your mind is already sharper than you may have given yourself credit for. And if some of these felt unfamiliar, that is simply an invitation. Every one of these habits can be built starting with your very next interaction, your very next decision, your very next moment of discomfort. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next set of lessons drawn from the sharpest minds in human history. This community exists for people who refuse to let their thinking stay unexamined, who choose clarity over noise and discipline over impulse. Thank you for spending this time here. Take these 7 habits with you, practice them deliberately, and watch how differently the world responds when your mind becomes the steadiest thing in the room.